And we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Feels like I was just talking to you last week because I was. But today I have different friends on the show with me. First, I think I actually met you first. Tris, over there. Tris Oaten, welcome.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here. My first live stream, Nicole. Can you believe it?
First live stream ever? That is kind of difficult
Mm.
to believe.
Thank you so much for
And
having me.
yeah, thank you for being here. And then also over here is Bob Doto.
Hello,
Welcome to the
hello.
channel.
Thank you,
So
thank you.
I met I'm pretty sure I met Tris first virtually, but we've never actually met in person yet. That
Not
must
yet.
be arranged.
Mm.
And funnily enough, Bob and I live way further away from each other, and we've met twice
Yes,
already. Once
correct.
in New York and once in the Netherlands for PCAM Summit.
That's right.
Well,
Yeah.
I am not a real PKM YouTuber, content creator, what have you. I'm a fraud, an imposter.
You know what? People are going to call you all sorts of things regardless, so just own it. Bob is the author of 5 different books over a variety of subjects. I think it's very Luminesque, actually, because I was looking through the titles and it was like one on Zettelkasten, which of course is what we're talking about. There's one on acupressure, on stretching, on spirituality, and on poetry. Like, what is happening here? Are you really that interested in all those things?
Sure. Yeah. I'm kind of if I'm interested in something, I need to write about it kind of person, in most cases. So it's not uncommon for me to be jumping around different subjects. I mean, those subjects are subjects that I actually did quite extensively to some regard. Like I was and still am to some degree like a body worker. Doing Chinese sports medicine called Tui Na. I went to graduate school for poetry at the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics at Naropa. Zettelkasten, obviously, what I do a lot of these days, and the margins of spirituality has been my kind of bread and butter writing for, I mean, since I was 15 or so, long time. So, yeah, there should be more books coming out on different subjects, but right now I'm kind of stuck in my Zettelkasten writing phase.
Well, that's good to hear because we need experts. And you are definitely an expert. You
Okay.
have the book, so that makes you an expert, right?
Of course, yeah. Without a book, who knows what you are?
And Tris, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit for those who don't recognize you because you're showing your face? What?
Right, yes, this is a bit of a big step for me. So I have a YouTube channel called No Boilerplate, which started off being programming focused, and then very quickly went off the rails into anything that I was interested in. I've done videos on ADHD and autism, which I'm particularly proud of, but anything that I'm so passionate about that I keep talking to my friends about and boring them, that seems like a good video topic to do. So
Did you even mention your channel?
the channel is called No Boilerplate. It's very generous of you. I'm also I also do I've got 4 podcasts, by which I mean audio fiction podcasts. I'm not used to doing talking heads without a script stuff, so this is all very terrifying. But I'm delighted to be here nonetheless. Before that, I was a software engineer for 15 years. Um, it'll definitely show, I think, in the course of our conversation that I am a software engineer at heart. There'll be lots of technical things, especially if we talk about Obsidian. But I've always wanted to be a musician, and I think now that I'm sort of a performer, I sort of am, or at least certainly in the creative space I've always dreamed of. So I'm delighted to be here.
So I'm already hearing that that's a similarity between the three of us because we have a lot of interests.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
we all use Obsidian as our primary tool of choice, is that right?
It is.
Correct.
It's your fault that I use Obsidian, Nicole. Your videos were very,
Is it
very inspiring.
really? Wow, that's actually an honor.
Oh, pleasure. It's I think I've gone off the rails with Obsidian. Perhaps I need some sort of intervention. Maybe that's what we can do tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason that we're actually here is because Tris and I were talking, and Tris said, "I've figured out Zettelkasten." I'm like, "Whoa, that is a bold claim." I mean, Zettelkasten is one of the things that got me into Obsidian and PCAM and Rome research at the time, but I would not say I figured it out. And Tris said, "Oh, have you read this book, A System for Writing?"
How embarrassing. Sorry,
And
Bob.
oh yeah, yeah. It's funny. Bob doesn't have a copy of his
I
own
did
book.
not. No.
We do. Mine's signed though.
Special
And
edition.
yeah, and I said absolutely. I reviewed it. I loved it, and I got my signed copy as soon as I could. So I feel like I wanted to get the three of us together because I think we're in very different places. Bob is the expert, literally has written the book on Zettelkasten. Tris is a relatively recent convert, but super passionate about it.
I've
And
certainly
I'm
read
a
all the
bit of a
books.
skeptic. I've read the books. I mean, maybe not all of the books, but I've read the books. I'm a little bit more skeptical. And, let's just talk a little bit about Zettelkasten, shall we?
Let's do it.
Fantastic. I think it's only right that Bob do the intro.
Oh boy.
Yeah, yeah. No pressure or anything.
No pressure. Yeah, I mentioned this talk in my newsletter the other day, and I said, look, I did no preparation for this, and I intentionally didn't. I actually really like to just kind of be off the cuff a lot of the times. So this would be that, very much so. What would you like to know about the Zettelkasten?
Well, what is the Zettelkasten? What is it, and what do you think the goal is? I mean, I'm kind of asking a leading question because I read your book, but
Right. It's a fun, like all things that people get very passionate about, even this question can be hard to answer, or at least hard to answer in a way that makes everybody happy. Right. So a Zettelkasten is very basic, could be considered a note-making or note-taking system that is utilizing non-hierarchy or leveraging non-hierarchy through the connection of single idea notes to create a network, a vast network for a lot of people to think and create from, think in and create out of. Which I was thinking about this today. It's kind of like define a chair, and you end up defining a stool, a chair, a table. That definition I gave could define many different things, especially today with the platforms we have and the way we think about how information is connected and leveraged. But for me, the Zettelkasten is that, right? It's a network of single idea notes that are connected in a non-hierarchical way. Sometimes we call it a rhizome. Or rhizomatically. And through the connection of these ideas, we encounter unique or sometimes novel insights that we didn't expect to find. And that, of course, informs how we think about things. And if you're a creative writer or a creative person, someone who does output, this becomes a very fertile ground for output. But yeah, ask have someone on tomorrow and they'll give you a different definition.
So would you say that the goal of a Zettelkasten, and at least yours, is to provide output? Or do
For
you
me,
think it's the thinking itself?
for me, I use it for writing, and because writing to me is thinking. It's where, I think it was before we even got on here, or maybe it was in my intro, I forget, but where the line was when we started and we're not started yet. But for me, I think through writing. If I'm interested in something, I will probably write something about it, or at the very least, I'll take notes on the thing. So for me, a Zettelkasten is highly tethered to writing. For other people, it can be strictly a thinking, ruminating, pondering environment. And I know a number of people who use it for that purpose. They have no intention of writing from it. But for me, it is strictly for writing, again, which is through which I think. And that's why the book is called A System for Writing. because that's my primary focus.
What about you, Tris? What is your Zettelkasten for?
Well, I originally thought that a Zettelkasten was a system for note-taking, because that is what all of the other books talk about: organizing notes, building a system of linked thinking. And as Bob said, in the book A System for Writing, as soon as it was recommended to me, I'll think of the YouTuber who I saw a video on, who recommended it to me. As soon as it was recommended to me by him, I knew immediately that this was the missing piece for me, because Bob chose a very good title. It's A System for Writing. Now compare that to other books in the area, very good books such as Atomic Notes. Atomic Notes is a very good book. I've read it. I like it. But it's the focus, by the very title, is on note-taking, and only a sort of an afterthought, well, what are you going to do with those notes? Whereas the thrust of Bob's book and Bob's way of explaining it worked very well for me, because the goal is very clear from the first page. You're using this to produce output, to produce writing. And as a YouTuber who writes scripts all day and every day, and as a fiction podcaster who writes fiction all day and every day, that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted something to help with that and organize my thoughts and so forth. So I will say that my own understanding of Zettelkasten is as a system for writing, just as Bob has described. Whereas I think, you see, you two have to be very careful. You're in the PKM space, and you don't want to make enemies, but I do not work in that space. So I can say things like, other people are very confused about what is and isn't Zettelkasten and what it should have. And I think the confusion, let me back up and be more positive about Bob instead of negative about other people. It was clear to me reading your book, Bob, that you understood what was going on because you had almost nothing to say. And what you did say was extremely clear. You didn't talk around the subject. You were just like, this is exactly what works. And hearing this is new information to me, that you've written so many books, I should be more attentive. That is wonderful. Seeing this, that you have come to Zettelkasten through an interest in output, in writing and so forth, makes perfect sense. That gets me very confident. That makes me very, very happy. You're not some other reviewers and creatives who said, I've tried Zettelkasten for 2 weeks. Let me tell you what I think about it.
Oh, I hate that.
Very understandable in the 2-week cycle of YouTube that we live inside. But 2 years, I think, might be really what one needs in that.
Just to allay any suspicions, if you do go back 5 years, you will see those same articles coming from me as well. It's just that I have, I am far enough from that time to be writing different articles.
Well, the difference, Bob, is that you wrote A System for Writing last year.
That's true. Exactly. I did wait to write the book. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm a little bit different because I think a lot of people would say I have a Zettelkasten, and certainly there's some elements of it that are similar. I don't personally say that, but that's more to do with my almost allergic reaction to most methodologies. I don't say that I follow any methodology, and I kind of just do what I do to do the thing that I need to do. And some of that is creating, but I still wouldn't say that my notes or my system is for the purpose of creating. I think the creation of stuff itself is just a step along the process. I'm actually just trying to understand the world. That's actually what I'm trying to do. And the best way to do that for me has been to create stuff, put it out there, and then have the feedback from people of well, actually you got this part wrong, or did you think about this? That just happens as a side benefit. So for me, the learning is an end on its own. The thinking it's just that this is the best way I've found to think. And if there was anything that I would be the most skeptical about Zettelkasten for, is its rabid fan base. I'm just so deeply suspicious of anything that that gets that level of like, oh, like a cultish following. And that's nothing to do with the concept, right? It's some of the people. It's some of the like, oh, sorry, that note isn't atomic enough. It's just like, no, what is this? The Zettelkasten police? That's what I don't like. But the concepts of Zettelkasten, like many, like many religions, the principles are pretty solid.
Yeah, I mean, I've known and know many people who have gotten burned out, who've burned out on the scene aspect of it, just can't hack it anymore. Being 47 years old, being part of different subculture scenes since I was 13, the same stuff I experienced in like hardcore music or art or writing subcultures or whatever exist here. The gatekeepers, the whole thing, the weird machismo that shows up in this sort of stuff. I have a lot of experience with that, so I recognize it when I see it. These things you're talking about, this kind of policing of the environment, and it's work to not ignore it, but to kind of witness it and constantly sort of figure out where to place yourself within that. But yeah, it can be laborious sometimes. But like I said, nothing new here. You'll find it everywhere.
Yeah.
I have at least found it everywhere.
Well, when we talk about the Zettelkasten, there's kind of four parts to that process. And generally, there's the first part is consuming the content and then creating fleeting notes or like some sort of reference note, depending on whether it's a book or a video or a podcast that you've heard. So you're writing down notes and really just to paraphrase or just to get it out on paper. And then kind of the second step would be turning those into permanent, or in your terminology, Bob, main notes that are a little bit more considered. And then the third part is connecting those ideas. And then the last bit is making stuff from them. Would you agree with that, by the way, just as a high level overview of the process?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Starting with just kind of raw material to get it out of your head, and like you said, considered, I think, is a good way to phrase it. Bringing that stuff into something that's a little more useful and usable, which would be the main note or the structure note or wherever you take it inside the Zettelkasten.
So I actually think that most people are the two that are the most understood are the first two. People already know how to write stuff down, even if like most people stop at that. Actually, that's how I took notes in school. Just take notes and then never look at them again. That part is wrong. But people already intuitively know that, to remember something, you should write it down. And then the second part, which is creating the main notes, I think at least in this crowd, that also is a little bit more understood. So I kind of want to focus on the last two, connecting the ideas and making stuff with it. And I really want to focus on practical stuff, like exactly how do you connect these ideas?
Mm-hmm. So the way we do it with the Zettelkasten is typically is you have your single idea note. So what became of the kind of mind vomit onto the page sort of stuff, and you turn it into a single idea note. And within that, you will indicate in some way, which varies person to person, but in some way you indicate that this idea can inform or relates to another idea that's in your Zettelkasten. And digital Zettelkasten, that'll be with a link, and paper-based Zettelkasten would be referencing the ID, or, which is typically how people identify their notes. They have like a numeric ID or alphanumeric ID, which you can also have in a digital setting. Nevertheless, you indicate that, look, you want to go check over here. When you come back to this note, you see it says, see also, or something like that, this note on this subject. It's maybe, and then you give some context. It's speaking about this in a different light, or, it's entirely personal, right? So there are times when I write, see this other note, it may not work, but it'd be good food for thought, et cetera. And that's the linking. right? Or the referencing of other notes or other ideas more so. And from there, you want to, if you're interested in going deeper, there are a couple ways to do that. One is to write. So you start collecting your ideas and following these connections and pulling them into a separate document and saying, okay, here's some of the connections I've made. Which ones are most interesting to me now? Or which ones are most relevant to the topic I want to talk about? Because not all of them will be, right? Each note can branch off. That's the network rhizome thing about it. They can each branch off into different directions. The example I use, which I think people are getting very bored of, understandably, is the apple example, right? A note on apples can take you into food deserts, into nutrition, into agriculture. It can take you wherever, but not all of them will necessarily be relevant to what you want to write about. So that's one way. The other way that dovetails into this is creating higher level views. What some people call structure note is a kind of note that many people use, which is you take your ideas that are in the Zettelkasten, kind of networked around, and you structure them. You give some sense to them. You put them on the page, similar to a rough draft, but you're really just exploring what's in these notes, what the connections are. Are there questions? Are there holes? Are there, it becomes a thinking environment really at that stage.
Is there one you could show us? A structure note that you could show?
Yeah, let me see here.
Excellent.
Sure.
Yeah, I would love to see what somebody else's structure notes look like.
Yeah, sure. Hold on.
I'm gonna pop your screen, your thing on the screen right now, just so you can see.
Let's see.
This was totally unprepared, by the way. So.
Oh, sure. Yeah. This is one that's in the book, so it might be familiar to people. This is on a yogic concept called pratyahara. So I am not writing necessarily on pratyahara, but it is something that I'm interested in because I've had a yoga practice for decades now or something, 2 decades, decade and a half, somewhere in there. And this concept of pratyahara, which in very short terms means like going inwards. And I had been taking notes on this topic from a yogic perspective, so a Hindu Indus Valley perspective, as well as from a Christian perspective. Pratyahara is not a term that is used in Christianity, but the concept of going inwards, quote unquote, is. And so, as you can see here in the blue links, these are links to notes, and some of the content that's underneath it, the text or the copy, comes from that note. Some of it's just my own thinking in the moment. Some of them are quotes, and it's starting to outline my thinking on this topic, right? So at the top, you'll see pratyahara, which is just the topic. I saw that I had a number of notes that kind of define pratyahara. So I just created a heading, says, what is pratyahara? And then you can see some of the ideas and notes there. And I was, like I said, was reading about this idea of going inward in Christianity. So I created another subheading here and said, okay, well, pratyahara also shows up in Christianity. And here's some notes that discuss that. There's this concept or this idea that pratyahara either takes effort or pratyahara should just be kind of manifest through non-effort. So I liked that play. So I created a subheading, pratyahara and effort. And again, this you can kind of see where this is going. What ultimately is happening here, though, is me saying, okay, I've got these ideas. I've created connections or I've established connections or relationships between them, but let's unpack them. Let's see what I really have to say on the matter. Because the network inside of your Zettelkasten, while it is a network and while there are connections, and those connections with context will be revealing, for me, it really takes kind of, okay, let's start saying some things about this stuff. Let's get some transitional words in here, and let's see how, okay, if I'm going to jump from pratyahara to pratyahara in Christianity, well, there's a cultural jump there. Is that even right to do? I have to start asking those questions. So this is what a structure note can be used for, and they can take many forms. You can have tables and charts, and it's your own thinking space. So whatever you need can happen here, or whatever you need to happen can happen here. But this for me, sorry, go ahead. This for me is just to be brief, this for me is the beginnings of a thinking environment or beginnings of a writing environment.
This is super interesting. You do you do these notes differently from me. Maybe I'll show mine in a bit. But I wanted to mention, because this is something that Tris and I talked about, the weird letters and numbers at the beginning, the Folgezettel. So you talked a little bit about the unique alphanumeric ID, and this is something that came from Nicholas Luhmann, right? And sometimes it's called Folgezettel. And Tris and I were talking about how to do this. I think, Tris, you told me about a plugin that you wanted to talk about or wanted to look into. Have you been using it?
Oh, Nicole, you've blocked out a terrible terrible insight into my life. I've tried like all of the plugins, and I've tried writing
Oh,
my
wow.
own. And because I'm a programmer, the curse of being a programmer is you can do everything. So maybe
Yeah.
you can like write your own stuff, which involves constant yak shaving and never finishing anything. Folgezettel, which I'll pass back to Bob in a moment to tell us about that. But I struggled a lot trying to implement Folgezettel in my Obsidian system. I see the value in it. I can't yet bring that value in to my system. It might be less needed in such a system like Obsidian, but I would love to hear Bob's thoughts on that. When you have something where you can have the hierarchy expressed through links natively in the system, and IDs are no longer needed because we're not using paper, or I should say, IDs are not essential because we're not using paper, what remains useful in Folgezettel for us?
Yeah, this is one of the, if anyone's interested in the great debates in the Zettelkasten world, this is one of them. And it's unfortunately, it is unfortunate that it is handled as a debate, because there really isn't a debate. It's personal preference once it gets to the level of digital. Because you're right, you don't need to have an identifier or an alphanumeric identifier for every note when you're using digital. When you're using paper, if you want to do this kind of non-hierarchical kind of rhizome system, you do, because you don't want to be doing things alphabetically or however else. And you want a way to link, to show, like say, hey, check out this note. And it's really hard to do that if you don't have an identifier. But in the digital space, you don't need them. Now, why do I use them? Well, for one thing, I'm 47 years old. I'm quasi-Gen X. I like analog, quote unquote, things. My brain thinks that way. It was sort of knee-jerk, to be honest, right from the beginning. I just saw Nicholas Luhmann did it. It immediately resonated with me as like, that makes sense to do that. Let's do it. And it was very, very quickly I saw the benefits for myself. Now, the benefits for me have been these identifiers have length to them, right? So they grow. And as they grow, that sort of tells you something. It doesn't tell you everything, but it tells you something. And one thing it tells you is this idea is related to a bunch of other ones, right? It's saying that this idea is part of a train of thought, at least at one level, right? There can always be many trains of thought, but it's telling you at one level, there is certainly a train of thought that's been developed here. And that has been extremely useful when I'm just sort of scanning through my sidebar, right? Where the notes are stacked and they are ordered according to these alphanumeric numbers, alphanumeric IDs. So when I'm just scrolling through, and I'm like, what was that note on Nicholas Luhmann and editing his own work, right? And I see that, and I see this long identifier. I'm like, oh, I immediately know without opening it that there's something going on about Luhmann and editing, or editing in general, or writing in Luhmann. Something's there, and it just pulls me in. It really just, I can't say it any other way. It pulls me into this small little cluster world. The other thing it does is I've been calling it like a forcing function. And by forcing myself, so to speak, to give an alphanumeric ID to every note, it forces me to establish a connection to something else. Now, can I just add the next ID and not do that? Absolutely. But it feels weird not to do it that way. So when I go to put this note in, I say, okay, wait, where is this? What is this speaking to? This goes to another thing with Zettelkasten. Like if I wrote this note without thinking of anything else in my Zettelkasten, so what I call in spite of, writing notes in spite of your Zettelkasten, which is not a negative. It just means just not thinking of your Zettelkasten. I now go and take this note and say, well, what does it relate to anything in my Zettelkasten, or is it starting an entirely new thread? That means I have to go through and kind of like figure out where it is. Does it take time? Sure, a few minutes. Sometimes it takes longer. Most of the time it takes less. And that just puts that note into the mix, right? Now, other people don't use these. A lot of people, I would say, maybe even most digital Zettelkasten people do not use these. What they use instead are these things called structure notes. And for them, when they bring a new note in, it just goes according to whatever, maybe timestamp or something. In other words, it stacks according to a timestamp. But they say, okay, well, I don't want to lose this note, so what is it speaking to? And they say, oh, it's speaking to this topic that I have a structure note for. And so people who don't use Folgezettel will often, as far as I can see, have lots of structure notes, because that's the place where they're showing how the idea relates, right? But I use structure notes very limitedly. I don't leverage them to that degree. And in part because I have this Folgezettel. I can kind of go on and on. In the course that I teach, which is a course on writing with the Zettelkasten, there's a whole class on just what am I getting here? What am I seeing? Because people inevitably are curious about it. But I can see things like, for example, when I bring, this is a niche example, but if you can imagine me saying, oh, here's a train of thought, that I want to bring into a structure note. I copy paste all those notes, just like you saw the links with those numbers, and I bring them into the structure note, and there's nothing else written there. If I stop that, leave, and come back a week later, and I open that up and I see all these notes are organized according to the Folgezettel, I know that I didn't do anything, because it would never stay in that order, right? That's the part of the mystery and magic of working with a Zettelkasten, is that you don't keep them in the order you find them. You take them out and you do something with them. So there's a lot of these just kind of indicators, some overt, some very subtle, that I just find pleasurable, even when they are a bit of a lift, as in like, I got to find where this fits. But for me, love it. Most of the time.
So Grace has a comment here about that. I used to have a numerical system thingy. It wasn't for me. It makes me think too top down when I work. I find the same. I used to have everything timestamped, so unique ID, a timestamp and then a unique ID afterwards. And I just, like you, Bob, I felt like I had just done it because Luhmann did it, and I was like, what am I supposed to do for that? And I get the point you were making about how it forces you to create links. I just wanted to show, like, this is how I create links. So this is like what I would call like an equivalent of a structure node. This is something on a tool called Loki. All of my notes already have metadata filled in. So this is a new node template, and I already have to create notes. So at the very least, the date is going to be there. So it links to my daily journal. And then I have to fill in the children, the siblings, the parents and stuff. And so maybe I'll pull up the outline here. Oh yeah, and this is also how I visualize connections. This is Excalibrain in the bottom right here. It's very tiny, but you can also zoom in and then click on the different notes there to kind of navigate that visually. But also, I do have much longer notes than I think you do. This is oh, by the way, what is happening with Obsidian with like embedded videos not showing in it, but showing unpublished? Anyway, so I have some links that are within a hierarchy, but I don't actually say anything about it. And this might be because it's a more technical topic. And for me, it's self-evident what it's for. So I have a lot of links here, but not as much actual text. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I am interested in from a Folgezettel was actually the first one that you mentioned, that it can be a way to identify clusters of thought. So I already do that in other ways, but like that is another way. That is an additional way. And I think the more ways that I can identify what things I really care about, regardless of what I think I care about, if I have a lot of notes on D&D, it's like, well, You know, my Obsidian Vault is not predominantly for work anymore. It's actually for gaming.
Yeah.
But and so I really wanted to implement it. But you know, Tris told me this about this plugin, and it was called the Note. Okay, now I don't know what it's called. It's called the Note ID, Obsidian Note ID plugin. Do you actually have that implemented, Tris?
No, I don't like it.
You don't like it now. Okay, but I was looking at it and I was
Tris
like,
told me about
hey,
the
this is
plugin
pretty cool.
Is a thing that all of my friends
Yeah.
say.
Okay, well, I looked at it and I haven't fully implemented it, but I think it shows progress because what it does is it doesn't require you to put the ID in the name. I hate that. I really don't want to change the file name into some weird system that maybe I'm not going to use later on. Like, forget that. What this plugin does is it lets you take a property, like an Obsidian property, and then it displays it as if it were part of the file name, and I like that. That I'm like, okay, I can possibly try that then.
And it indents the notes depending on how deep in the Folgezettel hierarchy they go. It's very clever. Very clever.
Yeah, admittedly, I don't use, or I use very few plugins. I use a plugin for kind of the look of something. I don't use data view. I don't use, I
Oh my
use
God,
Obsidian
what?
basically. I don't use any of it.
Oh wow.
You're not
I,
living.
that stuff just slows me down. I don't like relying on things like that. So I have a very basic, I use Obsidian as a text editor that can link things, and that has local files. And again, I use a couple plugins for like the wrapping of text or something, but nothing functional like or high functioning. But I wanted to show you, speaking of like what you can see, if you could bring my screen back. I brought up a
Sure.
note that might show something that I'm talking about. So this is a basic note. It's actually a rather short note with the exception of the quote here, which is from Lumen. So the note, meaning is circumstantial. It's talking about how meaning is created, based on circumstances and situations. Okay, people can debate that for the rest of their lives, but that's what this note is about. But what I wanted to show is that what you see here is at the very top, the note, the ID for this note is 43B2A2A. Okay, it doesn't have much meaning in and of itself. When you scroll down, you see a note here. It says this is the previous note. In other words, this is the note that this note is kind of speaking to or is jumping off of at one level. But what you see below that are two other notes. It says C, and then there's something about algorithms create their own meaning. And then you see below that a note that says ancient practices remove their lineage, lose their meaning. Okay. So what am I seeing? When I open up this note, these alphanumeric IDs are indicators of something. And that something is where this idea, it can be taken or spoken to as it relates to different areas of my Zettelkasten. I know that when the note starts with a 2, that's somewhere in the AI, more so tech algorithm area of my Zettelkasten. It's not the most robust area, but it's an early area of my Zettelkasten because I was writing a lot about social media. So when I look at this note about Lumen, which is a much later note or much later idea, I'm like, oh, you know what? You haven't written about algorithms in about 5 years, but this note could inform that. Now, what's happening even inside of me as I'm saying it right now? I'm thinking, oh, that's interesting. I could start bringing back this topic that I haven't written about in so long, but I was really, really interested in at the time. So there's a historical relevancy there that I'm just seeing just from the number. I haven't even looked at like what's actually being said or what I'm saying about this. Below that is another link. It says see note 7-1A2, ancient practices remove their lineage, etc. I know that 7 is a lot of spiritual notes, spiritual practice notes, yoga notes. It's not the only place they're found, which is how the top down that the commenter was mentioning is subverted at all times, right? Yes, the number 7 indicates, I know there are a lot of spiritual notes happening in there, but spirituality shows up in all the numbers basically. Nevertheless, just by looking at this short identifier 7-1A2, I'm immediately pulled in. Again, this is kind of like almost like psychosomatic, not psychosomatic like inventing issues. I mean like psychology and soma, body. I am like pulled into this sort of history, personal history of my own writing on this topic. And it's saying, hey, look, here's a new note that you've been writing about, meaning is circumstantial. And you can actually pull that right back into all that spiritual writing and that spiritual thinking you were thinking about. So this is, for me, this is the stuff that's kind of hard to write about, because I write about Folgezettel a lot. Not as an evangelist, I really don't care if people use it or not. It's not, I don't feel like it's better by any means, but it is unique, I think. But it's hard to write about this kind of more subtle stuff, which is I'm looking at this and I'm just getting all these feelings based on these alphanumerics, even before I open up the note and actually explore what's in them.
Well, while you're here, let's talk about this question from Shane. Would you typically link to every possible topic like a Wikipedia page, or are the links for practical purposes and focused on your intentions?
I believe in the subjectivity of all of this work. And by that, I mean, and the temporality of all this work. By that, I mean, my focus or my agenda is not to link an idea to every single possible idea in my Zettelkasten, because I could do that, and I could do that probably, knowing the way my brain works, I could probably link one note to almost every other note somehow. Not my objective. My objective is to kind of lean in or lean on to where my interests are in the moment, where I think my interests might be in the future. So I'll give it a little bit of thought when I create a note. I'll say, okay, this is the note that I think it directly relates to. In which case, that may be the only link, right? It may link just alphanumerically, right, in the kind of the breaking away of all the alphanumerics. And I'll say, I ask one other question, which I mentioned in the book. I say, what does this note relate to at one level? And then I say, what's another way this note might relate? And I give it a little bit of time, maybe a couple minutes, and I think, does it not? And if it doesn't, that's okay. I've established one relationship. But if it starts getting me thinking about, for example, in that note, right, this thing about lumen and meaning is circumstantial, I would never have thought about algorithms, right? But I just took a few minutes and was like, is there anything else I've talked about creating meaning? And I did a little search, and there it was. Algorithms create their own meaning through the process of X, Y, Z. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, that's really fascinating. So I created the connection. But I didn't sit there to answer the person's question. I didn't sit there and go, what's every possible connection? It's not, I'm a Taurus. I mention this often. I'm kind of ox-like. I like move forward in a direction, and I kind of do the things that feel right. But then anything outside of that is too much. I just want to keep eating the grass for a while.
Well, Tris, I would actually really love to see if you feel comfortable sharing. Like maybe you could share a structured note.
I'd be delighted. I've got a few things to say on Shane P's question, if I may.
Sure, yes.
I think that I have nothing to add in terms of Zettelkasten. I would have just learnt it from Bob's book and then spoken it back at him, so I don't think that's very practical. But I do know a lot about Obsidian, probably too much about Obsidian. Perhaps like you, Nicole. Our lives are wonderful and made delightful by Obsidian, but perhaps we know a little too much. When I was experimenting with Folgezettel, and the highest benefit that I could see compared to modern tools like Obsidian that have good native linking and even ontological links. Thank you for naming those for me, Nicole. I didn't know what they were called in my video. I called them named links, ontological links. The chief benefit that you get when you name your files with Folgezettel is alphabetical correct ordering of the tree for free in whatever view and whatever app. You could look at it in your file manager and it would be in the correct tree order. And in 1,000 years, it will still be in its correct tree order, even when Obsidian is long gone. So that I think is huge. It speaks a lot to longevity of our data, which I care a lot about as a plain text person. And I think for me, that is the biggest benefit that I can't reproduce with other methods. I can reproduce most else using the Breadcrumbs plugin.
Yes.
If there is time, perhaps I'll demo and talk about that.
Yeah, let's see it.
All right, okay. Maybe we'll do that
I
right
use it
now.
as well.
Oh, fantastic. Interesting. Then I mean, this is your show, Nicole. I don't want to tell you you're wrong, but that note you showed us had both parents and children, which is a little weird to have. I'd love to learn a bit more about how you're using it. Let me share my screen here.
Sure.
Let's see if this goes right. Just give me a moment. Okay, that looks all right. Move that over there.
Shall I add it?
Yes, please. I'm ready. I'm ready now. So, here is an example. I hope you can see it okay. Here
Can
is an
you
example.
increase the zoom a bit if you can?
We are at max zoom, but maybe I can get the text. Are you worried about the graph? The graph is small even on my screen.
Oh, that's good.
How's that? Okay, great. What we've got here is a pretty straightforward template for my notes. Again, thank you, Bob, for the clear guidance in the book. You can tell I've read a system for writing because I've got C links. Now, I originally put these up here in the front matter, like up here, say. However, I thought to myself, well, I've improved on Bob's system here, and of course I haven't, because actually the genius of the C link is you are in your own words describing why this is something you should go and see and go and reference. We've got here we've got a link to a literature note. I'm using a plugin to give that an icon depending on its tag for more discussion. So if I were to search for this, or if I were to look at the backlinks for this, on that one line, I would see that it is linked from this note for more discussion. So although there is no machine property, there's no machine readable property saying this is more discussion, it's a human using this system. And I think that's been a big revelation for me, is that automation can only take you so far. My brain still has to do a lot of work, and actually should do a lot of work. So what we've got here is the Breadcrumbs plugin at the top. Home, Zettelkasten index, fleeting notes are designed for destruction, and then this note here, which is, if a fleeting literature highlight doesn't spark immediate meaning, leave it unfiled and trust the system to resurface it later. If it sounds good, it's because I'm paraphrasing Bob. But if I go all the way, so you can see that we've got a tree here leading up to the top. In a Folgezettel system, we might have home being 1, Zettelkasten index being B, and then fleeting notes of design for destruction being 1 again. And then this note might be 1B, 1B. But the Breadcrumbs plugin has given us not just the numbers, which you sort of have to know. Bob, you knew that 7 was philosophy and so forth. That comes through practice, which one gets with this system. And if it doesn't, what are you doing? But I can see that here. I can see the names directly, which is useful once we start to go down another view. So because I've zoomed in so much, the text is a little cramped. But you can see here we're 5 levels deep now. And if I go back up one, this is the Breadcrumbs plugin hotkeys, by the way. I've mapped all these to a hotkey. We're now at the Zettelkasten index. Now, as usual, the graph view has become useless, so don't worry too much about that. But this is called the tree view in Zettelkasten. It takes these uplinks here that you've seen in the previous ones, that you just point to the parent. Like, where is my parent? In Zettelkasten, in paper, that is, where am I slotting this note? What am I slotting this behind? So we can get a sequence going. And that's the only thing you should know. We're doing bottom-up thinking. You should just know where in the edge of the tree am I attaching this. that's the genius. You don't need to think down from the top, which eventually becomes very expensive. And this is the top of the tree, and this is the down view on the left. Nicole, is this text too small to read on the left here?
Yes.
Cool.
Maybe you can just
very
read
cool.
out the ones.
Of course.
Oh, why?
Of course I can. This tree, if you remember earlier, Nicole was talking about the plugin that showed the Folgezettel IDs as a tree with indentation.
ID.
Here we've got the indentation. If you can't read the text, perhaps you can see the indentation. So somewhere we'll have quite a lot of indentation. Here we go, something like this. So here we've got another 5 levels deep. But if I go up a couple, we just see the children, the ones inside. I think this might be the best way of doing Zettelkasten in Obsidian if you don't use Folgezettel. I think that is my recommendation is the Breadcrumbs plugin. Unfortunately, it's extremely difficult to get started. Somebody, Nicole, maybe you, should do a video on Breadcrumbs. But notice that even though this note here only has a parent linked, it's actually got a child that is automatically detected, which is this one here in the down view. Returning to a thought or reference and developing the idea is vital. Another thing I learned from Bob. So in that child, we've linked back up to the previous one. So you only link to parents. You don't link to children. You don't link to siblings. Breadcrumbs calculates that. If my brother and I have the same parents, I know that we are siblings by our one parental relation. I don't also need to define the sibling relation.
The reason that I do have the children and parents, by the way, is because I've used a lot of systems and a lot of plugins.
Right.
And there was some time when I was using solely Excalibrain. And so it's just difficult to commit to one plugin. And so I have both. I don't have all of the parents everywhere. And I don't always have any metadata. Like I still have notes where I don't have any, so better to have children than nothing else.
Got it. And Excalibrain doesn't infer those links.
It can infer some things. There's a lot of settings on
Right,
it,
yes,
so
there
you
are.
can you can get it to do that as well. But there are still some notes where I only have children as a holdover from other plugins, not parents.
Gotcha. That's I think maybe the best feature of Breadcrumbs is that you've got these, perhaps I can't find them at the moment, implied relations, like if one way is parent, then it implies the other way is child, which is quite nice.
Can I ask a question about the child-parent relationship that's established?
Yes, please, Bob. Yeah.
So when you're saying child-parent, are you saying that the parent is this in relation to the idea or just the order in which the notes were put in? In other words, is apples are fruit, the parent always going to be the parent to Macintosh is a kind of apple, being the child? Is it child parent semantically speaking, or is it child parent just order of notes importation?
It's order of notes, which I believe is what Folgezettel is. Like you might have lots of parents that are reasonable. This is the one I'm choosing right now as I'm inserting it, just because it has to go somewhere. Just as you put it into a physical Zettelkasten or choose a number at the end of your Folgezettel, it kind of doesn't matter too much. We're not building a strict hierarchy. I did start off using. If you could unshare my screen, Nicole, I'll go back and look at the question that was asked. Where are we here?
Was it the one by Shane?
Yeah, that was it.
Would you typically link to every possible topic, like a Wikipedia page, or are the links for practical purposes and focused on your intentions?
I'm sorry to make you read it. I was thinking of the previous question. I'm so sorry. About somebody had a numerical system.
Yes. Grace, yes.
Grace used to have a numerical system. Wasn't for me. Yes, thank you. It made me think it's too top down. Yeah, I tried Dewey Decimal, because I read in the House of the Seven Librarians, which appears in Uncanny Magazine, by Ellen Kludges, and it's about this. It's a lovely fantasy story about a child who grows up in a fantasy library, and it's all about Dewey Decimal. And I thought, this is going to be great. I can have a sort of a Dewey Decimal system of my own. I learned, of course, that there is a personalized Dewey Decimal system called Johnny Decimal, where you start off and create your own categories. They both suffer from the same problem, which is top-down thinking, which is not what we're here for. I'm autistic. I definitely am not here for top-down thinking. Bottom-up thinking really works for me, and the Zettelkasten system really, really works for me, because I don't think, okay, so we're going through philosophy, and then we're going through Western philosophy, and then we're going into Christianity, and then we're going to this and that, and like that path takes too long, and if I'm doing my job right, gets longer every week as my brain gets more complex, as my Zettelkasten gets more complex. No. I'm going right at the bottom, where I've got Gnosticism, and I slot in something right there, or whatever. Notice how I'm dredging the bottom of my philosophy barrel to try and impress Bob. The top down just doesn't work for me, and it sounds like it didn't work for Grace either. Like we're building this bottom up. I think that might be how our brains work, like bottom up, like putting ideas together. Bob, you probably have thought about this more than me.
Not so much on how our brains work, because I think we're constantly coming up with new frameworks for that based on what the new fancy tool is. But I will say that the idea of top-down is such a common one in the Zettelkasten community, and it is often related to this idea of Folgezettel. The only thing I'll say to that is that I try to emphasize a distinction between the address, which is that Folgezettel, that alphanumeric, and the idea contained inside, which is why I asked you about like the parent-child. I stay away from those terms as often as I can, because they tend to imply hierarchy to a lot of people. Oh, well, this idea is the parent because it's supposed to come first. And as you mentioned, and as is mentioned in the book, that's not what's happening with Folgezettel. Like your ideas are still coming in as you come to them, and your parent idea can come in last, and it could be the last in the Folgezettel line, the alphanumeric line. It's just an address, and the way I describe it is like addresses on a street, right? One main street, 2 main street, 3 main street. These are not a hierarchy, right? And it does, but even more so, it doesn't imply the relationship between the people living at each address. It just tells you that they do live on the same street, but it doesn't mean that one main street is the parent of the literal parent of the child who lives at 2, right? Go ahead.
By the way, I wanted to mention that the names, like what you call those relationships, you can totally change in both Excalibrain and Breadcrumbs. So you don't have to use parent at all. You could use up or previous or whatever else you'd like. So maybe that would be a solution for that.
Yeah.
There's a question here from Mike that I wanted to hear both of your answers for. Mike M says, is there value to putting intermediate notes rather than linking directly? For example, if you link A with Z, would you link A with Z directly or put an M note in there that details that connection?
Shall I go?
Sure.
I think you better.
I don't know. I do not insert a note in between 2 to state the connection between the 2. What I do is what I showed in that example, which is I just state the relationship inside one of those notes. So usually it's the note that came second, I think, but it can vary, right? So if I have note A and then I 26 notes later came up with note Z or Z, which I love hearing. It always
Handover.
I know all the little like balloons and bells go off in my ears. Like, who's Z? Exotic. If I 26 notes later have note Z, then I just simply say in that note somewhere, hey, check out note A. This is how they would relate to one another. And when I go to write, or when I go to open a structure note or develop a structure note, but usually, like I said, in writing, I will often pull that context out. Say the train of thought is A, skip B, C, D, etc., jump right to Z. I will bring in both those notes, and often will bring in that little bit of text in the note Z that says, this is why they relate, because it's helpful. I may not use it, but I just pull that in. So the connection is established inside the note, not in a separate note itself, typically.
What about you, Tris?
I think Mike is using electronic systems, and I think it shows in the question. Mike, if you're still here, I'd love a confirmation there, because links don't have metadata, typically. So you can't give the context of what you're saying. So if you can't give the context there, well, it makes perfect sense to think, oh, I'd better have something else to add some more context. This M note that's in the middle. Or possibly Mike is a data scientist who knows about SQL and linking tables. This idea of having some metadata in the middle, but that for me, I demoed it earlier, that is solved by just writing in plain language around the note, instead of just linking in a big list. Like here's a big list of all the links, or if you're using Folgezettel, all the IDs that are relevant. You've got to say a bit more about that. See this for a counterexample. See here for discussion on the matter. That sort of thing. I got this from Bob's book, but I started doing it without any natural language context, and I have gone back to doing it in just a list, just as you've seen in both my notes and Bob's notes. I was delighted to see that. There are some things that should be automated and some things that shouldn't, and I think this natural language of what the relationship is about is very important. Though you can use what Nicole told me are called ontology links, where you can give a key name to the link. So I started off doing that, and it's possible. Hey, Nicole, who told you that they were ontology links? You mentioned.
I was talking to Jolt.
Jolts, of
And
course.
that's what he called. So the developer of Excalibrator and Excalidraw for Obsidian.
It's a great name. So it's basically naming a link. So you could name the link counterexample. You could name the link whatever, but you still can't name it a nice big sentence. And that's why I think natural language still works very well for me.
So sorry, go on.
Not at all. I just wanted to point out that Grace is doing a philosophy degree, and that's extremely funny. Grace, you should look at Morgana on YouTube, one of our colleagues in the PPM space. She is doing a PhD and talking about Zettelkasten. Yeah. I learned a lot from her.
Yeah,
talking very well about Zettelkasten. I'll say one of the best out there doing it, and also one of the people who's talking a lot about it in such a clear way, but also not really participating, as far as I can tell, unless she's going under a different handle. In the other satellite discussions, which is also really nice to see. Staying out of the fray.
Mike did confirm that they're using Obsidian. I wanted to say I'm a little bit different here from both of you, because I sometimes do one and sometimes do the other. I always start with just links, and at some point I find that it's not enough, and so. Like the thing that immediately came up is I have a note on observability, so like software system observability and monitoring, because most people think they're the same thing. And at first I just had a link that referred to monitoring, and then it made me think, like, this is enough of a question that I really want to flesh out just the differences between the two, and how exactly they're linked and how they're not linked. And so now I have a note that describes that connection. So it's not an ontological name, ontological link. It is a separate note, because for me that distinction was important enough. But I don't normally start with that. I start with just a link, and then when I start wanting to add more and more, I'm like, okay, this should be a separate note.
Right. I think if I can jump in, what you've just described about thinking about the linking process is a great example of where this system should not be automated any further. if Obsidian or a plugin or an LLM or whatever told you all of the pages that were linked, that were similar and linked to the note you're currently editing, you would have lost something. And what you would have lost is the process of making the connections in your own brain. And actually that is where a lot of the ideas come from. If you had a magic system that just showed you where all of your notes were linked and how they were linked and said, oh, this relates to this or whatever, you would have some value, but you would have lost the process of doing that and thinking, now where are these links here? What is going on there? Because no system, either stochastic or a language model, has your interpretation of the world and seeing the links between things that nobody else would have thought of, or at least the average of the entire internet's language might not think of it this way. Like with, I think that in my experience of being very into the computer science space and being very into music and YouTube and so forth, like now I'm in the creative space, that gives me, even just with those two things, unique insights that I don't think other people think about because of my experience. And we all have hundreds and thousands of other aspects of our lives that make us unique. So that I just wanted to stop there and the way you described making that link and thinking about what the links were and thinking, are observability and monitoring different or the same? That mental exercise is the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, we are out of time. We're already a little bit over, but maybe we can end on a question. A brief question. Just what's one thing that you would recommend that people do if they wanted to get started with creating a Zettelkasten? Or whatever system you call your system. Oh, is that really yours, Tris?
There is one book that I recommend after having read that. The other's great. I've got lots of value in, but Bob's book is terrific. Obsidian is the best tool for the job. I've tried them all. It is very good. I would recommend going through, reading a book. You could read this one, or maybe read the one after you've read that. Make highlights, sync them with Readwise, import them into Obsidian using the official Readwise plugin, and you've got the basics of a literature notes, and then you can start to pull out atomic ideas, thinking to yourself, why did I highlight this when I was reading? What was I thinking? That sort of thing. And there you have it. You've started to build atomic notes, but you do have to keep doing it for about a year before there's any value. It's a long process. That's a big disadvantage because it seems useless at the start. It's like the opposite of a large language model, which seemed brilliant at the start and useless at the end. That's mine.
What about you, Bob?
I must say, I do think the book is a great place to start. And it's strange to say that. I mean, I grew up at a time when you're really not supposed to say those sort of things. You don't become successful. You don't want to sell out, all that stuff. But I will say from a practical standpoint that, I wrote the book for people who are trying to figure this out and just are having more questions every time they get information online. It contradicts something else. And I really tried to give kind of a broad perspective with intent so that you could get a sense of what's being said, but here's how you can kind of start somewhere. Practically or physically speaking, I would say not to start with Obsidian, unless you are comfortable and familiar with that world, because I remember when I downloaded Obsidian, and I remember that I didn't use it for a year because I remember how bizarre it looked to me, and how it didn't make any sense. I look at, what is this, right? What I would honestly say, if you're comfortable with that and you want to go in that direction, you want to use digital, Obsidian is, from my perspective, the way to go. And I would say start with a note. Start with one note, one idea, and then when you have another one, see if it relates to that idea. And if it does, create your new note and state why it relates to the other. If you're uncomfortable with these platforms, Obsidian, Notion, Roam, Logseq, all the rest, which I certainly was, just start with paper. Paper is valid. It will be here a long time. You can't go wrong with just writing a note and writing another one, even if you don't stick with paper. People say, I don't want to start a system that I can't finish at the end of my life because I'll have to change things. I've changed my system so many times. It's okay.
Same,
Sometimes,
yeah.
sometimes it takes a month of like menial work to just change or like redo something. It's okay. You'll be fine is what I'll say. So start simply. If paper works for you, start with paper. You can always transcribe them into Obsidian later. And just start with that note, one note. And once your second note comes in, see if it relates. And if it does, state why, and you're off and running.
I think my practical one thing would be never create a note without linking to another, even if that note hasn't been created. I do this all the time. And I like if I don't have that note, it's still a link. When I do create that note, then it will have all of those links to the other notes that referred to it. So it's not lost. Those connections are not lost just because the node itself, it does not exist yet. And I have a data view query for finding all of those, like for finding things that I have referred to a lot but haven't actually made. And sometimes I don't even need to make that note. Sometimes just the fact that it doesn't exist is already like a really, it already gives me some insight as to what I should look into next. And even if it doesn't exist, I sometimes will create it just to look through what else has linked to it.
Sage advice from all participants.
Yeah, paper worked very well for me as I was trying to figure out what was going on. Like, there's a lot.
Yeah.
Like, I just one or two notes. And I was like, oh wait, I get it now. Okay, paper, yes, right. And then I switched back to Obsidian and I figured it all out. Very, very good advice.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to have to end this here. I could keep talking to you both and have talked to you a lot more. But thank you both for coming on and talking to you. I really, there's a lot that I want to incorporate from our conversation here that I at least want to try.
Great. Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you so much for setting it up. What a treat.
Yeah, it's been great. All right. Thank you everybody for watching. Whether you're here live or you will watch this on when it's not live anymore. Thanks for watching and have a great rest of your week, everybody.
Bye, folks.
Bye.